Good afternoon and welcome back. This last panel of the mid-year briefing seeks to address the final critical element to ensure successful business continuity and operational mission success in these trying times, information sharing challenges that remain. To lead this discussion, we have another great cadre of resources, each presenting a unique perspective, sharing their challenges and recent experiences. Steve Morris is a retired FBI CJIS Division Assistant Director and now is an IBM Associate Partner of their Global Business Services. He is also a recent addition to the IJIS Board of Directors and will serve as the panel's moderator. He brings years of public safety experience at the federal level to benefit the discussion. Chief Chris Trucillo, Senior Vice President and Chief of Police, as well as Office of Emergency Management for New Jersey Transit, joins us to present his agency's unique perspective as transit police in the midst of these multiple events. We also have Chief Katie Collins of the Analytics Office from Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, Department of Human Services, to relay her critical priorities. Without stealing any of the panel's thunder in this information age, we know that lack of information sharing may not truly reflect the real challenge, but perhaps more accurate would be the depiction of the refinement of critical data for better decision-making. Now, before I pass it over to Steve, I want to be able to sort of give the attendees a head up that we're having a little bit of a challenge with the technology or the connection for Steve, our moderator. So if you happen not to see him just momentarily, know that he is still with us and his voice will continue. But again, we hope that you enjoy this panel. And Steve, I pass it to you. You're muted, Steve.
Yep, you got me now, Maria?
Got you now. Welcome.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Maria. I appreciate that introduction. And again, I apologize to our viewers who may be getting some choppy in audio, video, or whatever. If you're lucky, you'll have less video of me and more of my just running my mouth and talking. So again, I appreciate Maria's introduction. I appreciate IJIS giving us an opportunity to have this panel. As Maria indicated, this is the last panel of the webinar series. It's been running for the last couple of days, and I think it's a very important one to end on, I think, because after sitting through some of the sessions so far, some of the common themes that have emerged in every one of those panels, that we're going to talk about, and that's information sharing. Whether you're talking about it from a resource and IT standpoint, or you're talking about it from a technology standpoint, there's a lot of points that will be made over and over again. For those of you that may have joined some of those other sessions, I'm sure you'll hear some recurring themes in our discussion. Again, apologize. I know we had some last minute changes. We have some pitch hitting going on our panel with Katie joining us from Allegheny County, and appreciate Chris being online. I think you guys are going to hear from Katie and Chris on their perspectives from both a law enforcement, public safety perspective, and then as well as from Katie from a health and human services perspective. I think two of those perspectives couldn't be more appropriate considering the current world events and current events that we're all living through, but also with some of the civil unrest that we've seen brought about by protests calling for reform in policing and different things. So we live in a very tumultuous time. So I think this conversation, this discussion, I think is going to be great. Again, as Maria indicated, or mentioned, the topic of information sharing, lack of information sharing is the caption for our panel, but I really think it's probably more importantly described as a challenge in information sharing. And I say that because I think today you would be hard pressed to find an agency or an organization out there that isn't engaged in information sharing. I think obviously, particularly in the post 9/11 world, a lot of agencies went through their own battles and bruises, the FBI notwithstanding. all centered around information sharing. So I think that the topic of lack of information sharing is probably not as accurate as it would be as a challenge. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of those challenges. But before I go to each one of the panelists, Chris and Katie, before I go to them for introductions and the first question, I kind of want to set some context around this particular panel. I know there's been a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion in the previous panels that covered the whole gamut, a lot of things. But as it relates to our particular panel, when you're just talking about generically information sharing, I mean, that's a broad topic. So to try to kind of put some focus and context on it to kind of guide the discussion, I kind of want to frame it in a sense that most people, most organizations and individuals that have roles in organizations that are charged with information sharing can appreciate the dynamic, the constant demands of information sharing and how we live by them. I think our current events speak for that. In the way I kind of see this information sharing challenge that we as leaders and organizations face is, if you think about transparency, and I kind of refer to it as the 3 T's. You have transparency on one end of the spectrum, and then you have truth on the other end of that spectrum. And when I say truth, it really means the accuracy of the information that you're sharing and what you are sharing and disseminating with folks. So when you think of that spectrum of truth and transparency, weighed in the middle of that, the kind of the true north that we're all seeking there is trust. And that trust has come up in almost every panel that I listened in on, because trust is where that partnership comes in. And partnerships are what make our agencies successful in doing our jobs. And you're going to hear about some of those, I think, from our panelists. So as you think of that spectrum between transparency and truth, in our ability as organizations, some do better when it comes to transparency. We have very open processes for collecting and sharing and disseminating information. Makes the public feel good because they know what we're doing. But at the end of the day, if the data we're sharing with them and the information that we're sharing with them, if they think it's flawed or they don't think it's accurate, that erodes their trust in us. The vice versa, we have organizations that share everything, but sometimes their sharing is not timely. It's not necessarily transparent to them how we got that information. So people start questioning those processes. Likewise, that erodes that trust factor. Somewhere in the middle is that sweet spot, right? And it's a needle that moves constantly. And that is where the challenges come as leaders in our organizations, is constantly assessing that needle and knowing where you fall in that trust factor, because I think trust is the driver behind getting the American public that we serve and the other organizations that we work with being able to do our job. So kind of with that as a backdrop, I'm going to throw the first question out. Well, I'm going to ask each one of the panelists as you address kind of this first question. Start out by introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about you and your role in your organization, what your organization's mission is, and then jump right into it and talk about some of the challenges that you have within your organization when it comes to information sharing. And at first, I'll tell you what, I'll throw it up to Chris first.
Thanks, Stephen, and I'm happy to be part of today's discussion. I have 3 hats here at New Jersey Transit. I'm a senior VP and part of the agency's policy-making team working directly for the president and CEO. I'm also the chief of police. And then the 3rd hat is I'm also in charge of our Office of Emergency Management. New Jersey Transit, for those who may not know, is the only state-wide transit agency in our nation. We have 12,000 employees. We service with 3 light rail systems, 12 heavy rail lines, and a very expansive statewide bus system that moves into Philadelphia in the southern part of the state and very heavily into New York City during the pre-COVID commuting day. We have over 168 railroad stations throughout the state of New Jersey. We have 68 light rail stations throughout the state of New Jersey. It's an expansive operation, and it, as I mentioned, operates in and out of 3 different states in the region. So the challenge here from an information sharing perspective is to our customers, to the public, especially during this period of pandemic. Even though our ridership is down, we, like many states in the nation now, are looking to phase back. And transportation from the COVID threat is something that has been identified as a concern. So we need to reassure the public, particularly our customers, that we're doing everything that can be done in regards to their safety. Everything from cleaning equipment, everything from providing enough service to promote a little social distancing, to making sure our uniformed frontline folks, not just train crews and bus operators, but police officers and fair enforcement officers especially, are doing what they need to be to do to promote that safe environment. In the past, it was a safe environment as it relates to terrorism, the prevention of crime, suppression of crime. But now we have a new challenge layered on top of that. You mentioned, Steve, the post-George Floyd incident, civil unrest that's been going on. So we've been very much dealing in the thick of that, supporting urban areas throughout the state where we've seen civil protests. Thankfully, in New Jersey, the overwhelming majority have been peaceful, but nonetheless, it requires a uniform presence. And then also, as I mentioned, with the pandemic, we're now trying to balance the enforcement of the mask requirement on transit, on bus, on rail, on light rail. My message to my officers has been one of, let's educate, let's seek compliance, but this is certainly not something that we're looking to take a heavy hand and look for enforcement. And yet, we've had people on social media ask for a more heavy hand, ask for enforcement. And I know we'll talk about it more later, so I guess I'll end it there, but that's a little something about myself and about the agency. I've been here 10 years. Prior to my service here, I did the bulk of my career with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, where I retired and spent my last 5 years there as the chief of department.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. So, Katie, why don't you tell us a little bit about your role in your agency and maybe some of the challenges that you guys face on a daily basis, particularly in this current environment?
Sure. So my name is Katie Collins. I am the Chief Analytics Officer here in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, which covers the city of Pittsburgh as well as a broader county. So the Department of Human Services here, we operate the child welfare system, work with behavioral health, mental health, and drug and alcohol, the homeless and housing supports, intellectual disability, aging, and in addition to kind of early education and family strengthening. And so through all of that, we serve roughly 20% of the county population at any given point. Over the years, we, in order to kind of improve how we serve these folks, we created an integrated data system. So our system's been in place since the early 2000s, and we integrate all of the information at the individual level for all the folks that we're serving, in addition to a bunch of external sources, including criminal and juvenile justice. So we have information on the jail, criminal court, adult probation, juvenile probation, in addition to information on public schools and employment and training, information on birth records. So a whole host of information that we integrate at the individual level and use for a variety of different purposes. My role in all of this is to support analytically and to identify, to help manage the warehouse, our integrated data system, and to identify use cases for all of this information. So we identify, for the most part, the primary reason that we integrated all this information is really to coordinate care, to improve the way we serve the citizens here in Allegheny County. So we've created tools for our frontline workers to be able to, if they're working with an individual, be able to see all the other services that they're working with and to be able to connect with other workers to reduce duplication of efforts, all of those pieces. We also use information to provide tools for our workers for decision making. So we've developed some predictive risk models, though we've been very kind of thoughtful, hopefully, about how we do that. One of the challenges in general that we face, and you hit the nail on the head, is around trust. And it's something that we take very seriously here, and also something that isn't built overnight. So we've been, integrating this information for 20 plus years, using this information, presenting it to the public, working with the public in lots of different forums, be it community groups, bringing together clients to influence it. So all of this being that anything that we create is not created without kind of this long history of a relationship with the community. We also in addition, and to kind of promote that trust, one of our beliefs is to being as transparent as possible, to provide as much information to the public as we can. So that's another role that we play here in my unit, to try to produce tools so that folks around the community can access information and all this integrated data, research reports about what we're doing, dashboards so people can explore what's happening. We have information, dashboard about our jail population, for example, so that folks can see, particularly during this time. One of the initiatives we did was since we work very closely with our criminal justice system, working with our court system and the jail to identify folks that were at risk in the jail that could be released, and making sure that the information is conveyed to the public about why folks are being released, who's being prioritized, and all of those pieces. And so in general, the challenges are kind of what you said, the building trust. And I think both with the public, and then I also think with our internal partners. So some partnerships take longer to build trust. So, for example, our partnership with our public schools took many years in order to create MOUs to share information. But we are seeing the fruits of that. So during this pandemic, one of the big challenges here and probably across the nation is thinking about public schools and what's happening with folks once kids start or don't start in the fall. And so we've partnered and used this kind of long history of partnership to help to identify, provide devices to people, provide internet to our clients and kids that are in need, identify kids that might need additional supports, behavioral health supports that maybe are not seen. So maybe I'll stop there. I presented a lot of information, but in general, that's all the stuff that we do here, and yeah, so I'll stop there.
No, you did a great job there, Katie. I mean, you're definitely right. You guys have a lot of things on your plate, and you guys obviously spread pretty broad there across the whole spectrum of public safety and health. I'm going to come back at you with a question, though, because you mentioned something that you kind of underscored, some of the points I made earlier. Sounds like you guys have definitely leveraged technology with your integrated systems and so forth. Do you have an example, though, of where, and I know from, I've got the battle scars to show for it from my previous job, where it doesn't matter how well your agency does at leveraging technology, but the public understanding that and seeing the effort that you put into that technology and everything that you're trying to do as an agency to be transparent and to provide them the information. At the end of the day, there are things that get in the way, right? That, you have privacy laws, you have HIPAA, you've got a number of different things out there that just make it difficult sometimes to share the information that you would like to share and that the public thinks or wants. So do you have an example maybe where you guys have really kind of turned the tide on that? Like, I mean, I know it's very, Chris, I know you experienced this, but particularly, Katie, what you were saying, how the public, it doesn't matter what you say, they just don't trust you. They just don't believe that you're giving them the accurate information. They don't believe you are really sharing everything that you can. And they can be very critical and very, quite frankly, they can be very hurtful sometimes, especially when you're working 24 hours a day to do your job. So do you have an example of how maybe you've done something creative or something that has kind of stemmed that or turned that tide or made somebody say, oh, okay, now I get it? Any examples you can share with us?
Yeah, lots of examples. Maybe I'll talk about one that we're currently working on right now, because I think it is both a challenge that we've had with technology and then something that we're working on to help to engage better with the public. So all of this information that I'm talking about, this integrated system that for years we've provided for our workers and providers to be able to view and when they're working with a client. We have never to date, or very infrequently to date, have shared that information back with clients themselves. And so, of course, people are wondering what information you have about them and where that information is coming from. And this is a challenging project that we're working on, both for technology's sake, for privacy, to make sure that only people that can access that information are able to access it, but has really and actually for data quality, making sure that the information we do have is right. If you're actually seeing information we have on you, potentially there's things that are incorrect, and that could cause many problems with trust. And so, but we think it's important enough to work towards. And so we've been developing this for the last few years or so, and finally have landed on a tool, and we're currently working on the best way to market it and get that information out to the public, because we do feel that particularly in human services, when we're talking about information on individuals, but in general, that having them being able to access their own information is good for both kind of accuracy, for them maybe to advocate for their own care, to be able to have that information in one place. And so it's an example of something that we've kind of had years of going through with technology issues, with giving people a login, with privacy issues, with data quality issues, but that we've kind of kept at and are hopefully releasing in the next month or so, and we'll give individuals access to their own information.
Great. That kind of touches on that transparency part. I mean, you can't be more transparent than giving folks access to their own stuff. So thank you, Katie. Chris, I'm gonna kind of throw that question back at you from a law enforcement perspective. I mean, obviously, I can appreciate firsthand the frustration of working your hardest 24/7 and just somehow or another not winning over the hearts and souls of the public that you're protecting and you're putting your life on the line for. Do you have any specific examples that come to mind where you think you've really turned a curve, or you really done something creative or innovative that kind of got you to that point with a particular group or a community of folks?
I don't know that it's innovative, Stephen, but I think we try very hard to integrate the department, our officers within the communities they serve. We look for opportunities to collaborate, to work with them on things as simple as giving out candy on Halloween, or playing basketball in charter schools in the inner city with the same students that ride our urban light rail system. So they see the officers who are on those systems in a different setting. So we do things like that. We've adopted a very strong social media platform. You know, I told a colleague after the George Floyd incident, I said, you don't want to be a department that has to create trust post that environment. You hope that you've built it in the bank and that you have something that you could rely on that's a good foundation moving forward. And that's what I think I'm proud of my team in my information technologies unit within the department. We had an incident just a couple weeks ago where in Penn Station, Newark, we had I'll say a homeless woman gave birth in the ladies' room. And immediately my officers were in there, and we all wear body-worn cameras, and we've been doing it for 3 years. When you talk about trust and transparency, I wanted to be on the front end of that technology, because to me, there's nothing better than a video to get trust and be transparent. And we captured that event, and we had an officer save the life of an infant. And it was filmed from the moment he took the baby in his hands in the restroom and began CPR to into the patrol car, because it was critical and couldn't wait for EMS to arrive. And on the entire ride to the hospital, and on the ride, you hear the baby begin to cry. And it was a beautiful sound. It was a beautiful video. And I think a much needed one. And we were just lucky enough to have it captured in that moment. But those are the kind of things that are going on, in my opinion, across the nation. And law enforcement officers are involved with incidents like that every day. And I think it's important, as you mentioned, for public trust to earn that trust back, that people see another side. And those of us in law enforcement, as appalling as the George Floyd incident was, and it was horrific, and it needs to be addressed, and we have to recognize that we have to do better. It shouldn't negate what goes on in policing every day, which are incidents like I described and many others, because we've got to gain that trust back. And if all the public sees are the infinitesimal incidents that are the anomaly and not the rule in law enforcement, we're never going to get that trust. So I think we need to do a better job of humanizing the police. And I'm real proud of my social media folks who are trying to do that on a day-to-day basis.
No, I couldn't agree with that more, Chris. And you literally took the word right out of my mouth as you were talking there towards the end there. It's all about humanizing the men and women that make up our organizations. And when you humanize them, then it puts a face, to them, and not just an organization or something that, the public can stay mad at. So those are great points, and you definitely should have a lot to be proud of there for the work you guys are doing in that regard. I know I have there's a question just popped up. There's a couple more things I want to talk about, but the timing is right for this question, because a question popped up as we're just talking about transparency and showing, and letting folks have access to their data. I'm going to try to paraphrase this question a little bit, but it was really based on what Katie had mentioned about giving people access to their own data, and they also make the connection with law enforcement. Is there the question is, are you including all data, or is there data that you do not show for some reason? Same for law enforcement. Obviously, law enforcement's got to be somewhat reserved in what information that they share with the public. It can be problematic sharing too much. So I guess that question really goes, at the security of the data that you are sharing. I mean, you can't share too much for obvious reasons. So how do you, I think the question is, how do you manage that? How do you control the access to the data that people are getting out of your system?
That's a great question. That's a great question. And that's a debate that actually is going on right now in the state of New Jersey, where there's a cry from the public to release more data on, for instance, police misconduct. And the Attorney General of the state of New Jersey put a directive out to release information, not just current information, but information going back as far back as 2014, and even on people that may be retired at this point. And there was a stay on that put by an appeals court, and that's being worked out in litigation right now. So we'll see what develops from that. In terms of our department, we release our crime data. We report out our complaints. People make complaints against police officers. We report that out to our local prosecutors as required. We indicate what, if any, discipline was promulgated as a result of the incident. We'll contrast and compare complaints month to month, year to year, so the public can see how we're doing. We have an early warning system in effect, where if an officer gets a certain number of complaints in a certain period of time, we'll more tightly supervise that officer. Perhaps we'll get specialized training so that officer learns skills like de-escalation, verbal judo, cultural diversity training. Whatever a review of the complaints indicates, what we want to try and do is remediate and have someone have a successful career going forward. But in terms of, to the extent we report out to the public, that in our state, in New Jersey right now, is actually being litigated.
Yeah, that is definitely a sticky subject there. And I can appreciate that from some of my own previous experiences. But Katie, that same question to you, when you since I think it was your when you were talking about giving people access and stuff, that's what I think this question. How do you control that? What kind of is it technical or technology that you rely on to provide that kind of security, or is it policies and processes?
It's all of it. So we have processes to provide folks with just an individual login. We also have built in an auditing process within all this whole application, so that we can regularly see who's accessing what records. That's more for kind of workers accessing, but we'll be able to use it as well for clients accessing and be able to identify when that might be happening. And in terms of access to all the data, yeah, I mean, number one, I think it would be overwhelming to folks to have all of their information. The information that we're providing is information we're providing also to workers that are more kind of service level. Yes, somebody was involved in a service. There was a diagnosis. These are the dates. Yes, there was a jail booking. These are the dates. That kind of information, and not detailed case notes, for example, that a worker might be writing to better do their job. So there's a bit of a line there about kind of what information would be useful for folks to access, as well as what information is maybe more for internal workers as they're doing their job. But in terms of kind of the kind of auditing process, we have a very kind of documented, well-established auditing process that we share with everybody that wants to see it, and are happy to provide to anyone here, as just another way that we're kind of ensuring that folks, that when we're giving them access to their data, that their data is also protected.
Okay, I think that that's a great response to that question. So I'm going to change gears just a little bit, because I do want to bring kind of a technology spin into this just a little bit. And I'm going to share. I know from my previous role within the FBI, one of the programs that the FBI CJIS division manages, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with the Uniform Crime Reporting Program. In the Uniform Crime Reporting Program, there's 4 or 5 collections under that umbrella program. I know, Chris, you mentioned use of force. That's one near and dear to my heart. That's one that I was personally involved in initiating, based on quite frankly, based on a conversation I had with Director Jim Comey shortly after the Ferguson shootings in Ferguson, Missouri. And that was the catalyst for the use of force collection that the FBI is developing and is actually rolling out. So within the Uniform Crime Report Program, there's always been a criticism of that program that, in the way I looked at it, is the Bureau was guilty of letting perfection be the enemy of the good. They would spend so much time making sure the quality of the data that's coming in, that's being submitted by the thousands of agencies out there. They went to such an inordinate extent to make sure that data was quality controlled. Well, in the process, as you guys most folks know, that by the time the publications came out, a year old, and that's all a huge criticism, not by the fault of anyone's, but it was just out of necessity to be accurate, which is, again, that kind of on that truth spectrum. We're so heavily weighted on the truth side of that debate, to where people just said, well, that's great, we appreciate you sharing it, but the data is already a year old. So one of the things that the FBI did is they developed Crime Data Explorer, which is an online web access that people can go to and start querying data, all intended to kind of help shrink that gap between the data that's being submitted and the data that people can access. So that's just one kind of anecdotally an area where the Bureau finally, albeit it took them a couple decades, to start leveraging technology to kind of help them in their information sharing efforts. With that as a backdrop, I would ask you both, is there a technology that you think of that either that maybe that you already have or that you might be using, wish you had? How would you use technology to have a bigger impact on your ability, or to help you and your agency's information share? Where do you see that? Is it something behind? Is it a back office kind of technology, encryption stuff, or is it web facing, more user interface, public facing? Just curious if you have something that comes to mind that if you could have it, you'd love to have it.
Katie, you want me to jump in there? Okay. Yeah, no, I was just thinking, Stephen, as you were talking, some of the things, I mean, we've had it for a while now, but things evolve. Like, think about if you're a person who's on a bus and there's somebody 3 seats away from you who is making you very uncomfortable, or you're on a train and you see someone very suspicious. Well, there was always 911, call 911. But how could somebody on a bus feel comfortable calling 911, having a conversation, or on that train? So a number of years ago, we were one of the first transit agencies to develop and put out to our ridership the ability to text a tip. And I can't tell you how useful that has been. And we've gotten feedback about the comfort level, particularly with our female ridership who, when they're traveling alone, it's comforting. If they feel uncomfortable, they can text, and the comms people text immediately right back, and they stay with the person virtually until a police officer gets on that scene, and then they give a disposition and let that person know, okay, this is how we did. So now we're looking, okay, what's the next iteration of that? So we're looking at a product, and we've employed a product, and I won't name it because I'm not giving endorsements, but where somebody now could send us video so we could see what they're seeing. Remember, we're a statewide organization, and we're challenged by geography. And we might not have a 2-minute response like you would have in a bedroom community or a municipality. It might be a little longer. And they may be on a mode of transportation, obviously, that's moving, and we have to get to wherever it is. So now they have the ability to send us a picture, send us a video. We can see what they're seeing. And then all of our officers have smartphones. So we can then push that video out to the officer who's responding so they can see it. So the supervisor who may be in a different location and unable to get to that scene, they have access to that video. So we're always looking to see what's the next bit of technology that we can use to help us accomplish our mission. And again, I cite that challenge of geography for my police department. We're dependent on intelligence-led policing. Like you mentioned, the issue with the Bureau and the information not being necessarily timely. You know, it's in CompStat, we have a term we need, accurate and timely information. Well, you could have accurate, but if it's not timely, to your point, Stephen, it's not necessarily helpful. So we're analyzing on a day-to-day basis what's going on across the state in our transit system. And then we're using that information literally on a day-to-day basis to determine deployments for our officers based on what we're seeing and based on what our intel unit projects that we may be seeing. I always say that there's no police officer here at New Jersey Transit that gets a set of keys tossed at them and, okay, we'll see you back here in 10 hours. They have a very prescribed, directed patrol schedule that they need to meet. It's very challenging, but they're very committed, and knock on wood, we've had great success with it.
Thank you, Chris. Katie, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. I think things that we've been thinking about here recently is tools and techniques to better use our unstructured data. So to date, we really use our administrative data to make lots of decisions, but particularly for kind of caseworkers when we think about it, but it could be true for probation officers or any folks that kind of work regularly with clients. So much of the information that we need is in the notes that people are taking, the unstructured data. So what kind of techniques can we that we can employ, and what technology can we use to make that more usable to the worker, so that they can better case review, better transfer when you're transferring a case or information from one person to another. They can more easily understand what happened with that. And so that's one piece that we're really kind of looking and interested in, and figuring out how we can use technology and techniques to make better use of that. The other thing that we are really trying to do, which has been done a lot in the private sector, but probably less so in the public sector, is really engaging with our clients in more real time, using technology. So be it with phones, SMS, trying to do kind of more customer satisfaction, what's happening, and getting that information in, and then using it and incorporating it and using it in decision making. And that's a bit of a challenge to try to figure out what are the best ways that we can get just the general public, and particularly clients, to interact with us in more real time using technology. So those are the two kind of main pieces that we're thinking about, in addition to lots of others, of course.
No, that's very interesting. I definitely, hearing you and Chris both describe that, I mean, I can see the different types of, I mean, what you just described is more analytical, software based. You know, how do you, like you said, leverage that unstructured data, kind of how you deal with what you have. And of course, what Chris was talking about with mobility and texting and that sort of stuff, two kind of very different perspectives. So it's very, very helpful. So I know we're coming up, we've got about 10 more minutes left, I think, for our panel. There's one question that I know it's others have asked, but it kind of wraps up the panel a little bit, because I do want to leave some more time for questions at the end. But as far as questions from me as a moderator, the one I would pose to each of you is, so you have organizations like CJIS that are private industry, consortium-based groups. Clearly, when you look at organizations like CJIS, what can we do? What can CJIS do, or other similar organizations? What could we do for your agency, for you, that would help you going forward in this current environment that we're in? And I say that not to give you the answer, but is there's been so much effort, obviously, put into technology. It advances so rapidly. One of the things that I've heard from committees that I participate in is agencies that don't really struggle with the technology as much as they do with the implementation and the practitioners part of it. It's like, and Chris can probably appreciate this, with 3 or 4 years ago with body cams. The body cam, the technology works it's pretty simplistic, but it's the policy and the guidance and the implementation and the kind of the rules of the road stuff that a lot of agencies struggle with. So do you see an organization like CJIS helping in that way, or, with the technology? I'm just throwing that out there. I mean, what could we do to help you going forward?
Yeah, Katie, if you don't mind, I'll take that one just because of the body camera issue. Money's dear in public organizations, so you can't make a mistake. You can't make a bad decision when it comes to a procurement like body-worn cameras or like some other technology. And that's not necessarily the wheelhouse of a chief of police. You rely on others. And I think to be able to go to an organization like CJIS to say, what do you know about this? Have you done research on this? Have you had any collaboration with privates that have solutions to this? And then we have an opportunity to piggyback on that legwork initiative. It makes us more confident with perhaps being able to move forward with a particular technology, with a particular vendor, because again, we just don't have the public dollars not to get it right the first time in terms of procurement technologies.
Yeah, and I would echo that, and also just in general being kind of the bridge between jurisdictions as well as the public and private sector, and providing resources. So be it if other jurisdictions have already done procurement and identified different technology and it really worked, you know, being able to share that kind of information is really helpful for us. Being able to connect us to other jurisdictions that have done similar things or looking for similar things, and particularly across to the private sector if that's available, because often, you know, the technology and the information that they're using tends to be can be, you know, more innovative potentially than what's being used in the private and the public sector. So being able to kind of understand and learn the landscape from other fields as well is super helpful.
No, that is good to know, and that is that I've heard very similar feedback from you know, from committees that I participate with, IACP and others, and so that's very good feedback for us to hear. I know that one of the perfect example is one of facial recognition technology is a huge hot button issue right now, and despite the efforts of the FBI, and myself and others to go out and kind of talk about what it is versus what it isn't, it just sometimes that message just does not go through, and it just doesn't go through because this what we've been talking about on the trust transparency part. If you're, to Chris's point, if you find yourself trying to build trust or trying to explain something after something's already happened, then you're already lost. You're just not going to get there. But no, that's great feedback. Now, I do see one question that came up on is a follow-up to the UCR information that I mentioned earlier. And I'm probably going to have to defer that to my colleague FBI, because there's a question about, does that mean that the data that's being available for UCR, will there be, any kinds of changes to the, updates to that as if it gets reported quicker? Again, that's probably a question I would have to defer to my friends over at the Bureau. I've been out of it for about 3 years, and I know their best efforts to try to reduce that latency on reporting. I definitely wouldn't want to speak for them and where they're at and what they're doing on that. So I'd have to defer to them on that one. Let's see. There's one other question I see in here, Alex. Let's see. For the question, I'm just going to read it right here. For the question on what CJIS can do, you both mentioned procurement help, and I think that is spot on. But what about policy, procedure help, and information sharing? Do you already have a resource for that? I don't know if that's directed to CJIS or others, but I think
I was going to say, Stephen, pardon me. Again, I'm going to use the body-worn camera example. You were spot on when you said the devil is in the details, and the details is the policy. What does the policy say? And is it appropriate? So there's organizations like the IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, that have what's called model policies, but each agency has certain nuances. I mentioned that we're a transit agency, so we don't always respond via a vehicle to a call. We have people pass by an officer by the tens, by the hundreds, by sometimes literally thousands during an AM or a PM rush. So when they're supposed to engage and turn on that body camera becomes very specific and very important. But to the questioner's question specifically, yes, I just would be very helpful. What's the best policies that are out there? How have other, in my case, transit agencies handled this particular issue? Having an entity a nonprofit be able to look at what's the best available policy out there is very helpful and very valuable.
Yeah, that raises a good point. I do think that, you know, as you're talking, as we're talking through that question a little bit, I mean, I definitely can see a role that organizations like IJIS could serve as far as being a repository or having a library of best practices, if you will, that can be borrowed from agencies that have kind of gone through it and, you know, earned their stripes, so to speak, on some of the do's and don'ts of this technology. And if that's something agencies would share, I'm sure I just would love to kind of serve as that conduit or that repository for it. That's a great idea. Katie, I don't know if you had a comment. Katie, I wasn't sure. I didn't mean to step on you if you did.
No, I would just say, yeah, it's always helpful to have kind of a central repository. We do have information on, you know, what our policies are, and they're public, and we are happy always to share those. But it's always helpful for an organization like IJIS to be kind of the convener of all of that information.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate it. So we are literally a couple minutes from our bottom of the hour. Alex, did you have any questions that came up that I didn't pick up on the on our chat board? Maria, do you see anything, or do you have anything?
Steve, I think we're good. I guess the only question that I would throw out there, because some of the questions that were posed and some of the very positive comments about the panel and their contribution are a little bit more detailed in nature, and we'll certainly follow up with the panelists and provide those to the audience. But I guess I would ask a couple of generic questions and sort of wrap the themes. So to Chris and to Katie, what would your 2 or 3 top recommendations be to your peers nationally that they should consider given similar circumstances? Meaning, we know that the pandemic and reform challenges come in these waves, and it may have hit Jersey or the East Coast, and it may be on the way to the Midwest and or the West Coast. But at the end of the day, what might be some of your recommendations, given your experience, that you would want to share with your peers and how they should consider some of the priorities in order to alleviate or at least maybe ensure success?
Sure, I can start with that one. I would say, first and foremost, the one thing that we've been doing in the last few months, not that we haven't done it in the past, but is really engaging with the public and using the mechanisms that are already in place, because there's tons of people in the communities that are experts in various things. So we have we formed an equity task force around COVID to make sure that you know, we're talking to folks that are working in communities where that people might be have overrepresentation in terms of cases, and really engaging with those folks and getting their feedback. And I also think, at least in our experience, putting as much information out there and with as much explanation as to what that information is I think helpful in this time period. So we've been working with our health department to try to get as much information at the detailed level, particularly around COVID. So those would be the 2 pieces: is being open and transparent in as much as you can be, and engaging with kind of existing groups and getting feedback from community.
Thank you, Katie. Chris, can I bother you for a couple of recommendations?
Yeah, and I'm going to speak as a chief of police. You know, number one, don't have fear. We've faced trying times and troubles in the past, and you follow your compass, you follow true north. You know what right and wrong is, and you call it when you see it, what's right and what's wrong. Take care of your people. We're in a pandemic. I know that was very critical on my department, and keep them informed. I think communication, it all circles back to communication is you can't leave them out there alone. You can't leave them out there doing the difficult work, wondering what the chief executive of the agency thinks. You need to be with them. You need to be beside them. You need to lead them.
Thank you very much. And Steve, can I bother you for a couple of concluding remarks?
Absolutely. I know all I will say is those are great, great suggestions, words of advice. And, you know, all I would say is, you know, Katie, thank you for pinch hitting on short notice. You did a great job. I really appreciate it. Chris, thank you for your service. And to IJIS, thanks for putting this together and giving us a great forum to discuss something that will always be a part of our job. No one's ever going to figure it out. There's no silver bullet solution or whatever, but the only way we're going to do it is continue the dialogue like we had today. So I really appreciate it. It's been a great honor to serve as a moderator for this panel. I just thank all three of you. And if you just bear with me a couple of minutes, I'm just going to make some closing remarks for the mid-year event, and then we will say goodbye to our participants. So just for a moment, I want to thank everyone that has participated in the event. First off, the IJIS Board of Directors, the staff, and I all thank the panelists that we had on all 6 of our panels for their valuable contributions over the 2-day briefing, and we thank you, the audience, for your participation at this event. This virtual briefing has been a culture change of our own, and we hope that it's provided you with the valuable information and experiences from the field. I also thank our staff who ensured success despite the very new dynamic. I want to remind everyone that from a housekeeping perspective, the taped panels will be available via the IJIS website. Feel free to review the panels that you might have missed or share the link with your colleagues. As I mentioned yesterday morning, our regular advisory committee meetings will take place next week and culminate with a joint session on Thursday, August 13th between 1 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We encourage you to engage in the dialogue. Please visit our website for more information. And as with all of our events, we seek to further the discussion with a plan forward to support the mission objectives. That is often in the form of the roadmaps or the playbooks or supporting the development of necessary standards or policy development that's been mentioned on this panel and on other panels throughout the event. Regardless of the outcomes, we invite you to participate in addressing the challenges of our world, both the pandemic and police reform. Please reach out with your ideas and potential engagements. And finally, we thank all of our public sector and public safety practitioners for what they do for us every day to keep us healthy and our communities safe. We must do our part, and we invite you to join the IJIS community in doing so. We thank you for joining us, and we ask that you be safe. Thank you all. Bye-bye now.